again, being the tallest, like it's sort of like people would say, oh, it's so amazing, you're so tall, like you get so lucky, but you are, right? You do have advantages, but it's also like if I sat down and sat down for an erg test, like kind of when I got to the elite level a little bit higher, like you're sort of expected to do something, right? And so when you do it, you're expected to do it. And so even though you did do it and you're like, wow, I did that, it it almost was like it was never like, wow, that's amazing, good job. It was sort of like, oh, okay, well, you should be able to do that because you are this like this body, this specimen, like blah blah blah. So it just kind of became nothing felt rewarding, nothing felt fun after a while. And then I was going to be done. Like I didn't really I had no aspirations to make the national team or anything, but my coach, I guess, got in touch with the Olympic coach and said, hey, I have this athlete. I think, she could be good one day. And so they shipped me off to a camp. Oh, that was the other thing. After my high school year, I loved it in high school. And so I wanted to kind of pursue it. I went to junior national team camp in high school. Like 3 days in, the coach is like, yeah, you're not going to make the team, but you can learn as much as you can. So I was cut from junior national team camp like the first week.
This is Terhaar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shaurya. Glad to be here.
So you've been teaching here at Peddie for 10 years now, and I've been a part of your classes, and I've always noticed you have a passion for what you teach, and you seem very interested and enthused by it. And something you wrote was that nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. So why do you believe that to be true, and why do you think enthusiasm is so essential?
I think mainly because it's infectious, all right? It's something that you can share with other people and it's so easy, right? You can show up and you can be enthusiastic and engaged, or you can show up and be kind of like a bump on a log and not part of things. And you're not like that all the time, right? Like, but I think it's also a little bit of a responsibility when you're presenting or as a teacher to be that way. Because you want, I think, like you guys aren't going to remember anything from bio or from anatomy 5 years from now. I don't think that's the goal. I think is just to kind of like spark an interest in what you're learning and to gain an appreciation of the process and to feel that the process is worthwhile and it's fun. And I think it's, important to have fun when you're learning as well. So
This way. Do you think people lack enthusiasm these days when they're working, or do you see that as a culture nowadays?
it's a tough question because it's pretty general. I don't know. I think it probably depends on the job, I guess. If you don't enjoy your job, you're not going to be that enthusiastic about it, or maybe it depends on the people you work with. My husband is a rowing coach and he loves what he does. So I don't have like firsthand experience of being with a partner that doesn't like their job and is not enthusiastic about it. And my sister hates her job. I think there's sometimes this sort of like culture of like being too cool for stuff. So you don't want to act like you're too enthusiastic. Like if you're enthusiastic, you're kind of like dorky or nerdy sometimes. But um, I think it kind of depends on what you're doing and in the mood. It's not like every day everyone shows up and like, woohoo, because he'd be like abnormal. That would be like, what's wrong with that person? But I think in general, you try to bring your best self to things because what's the other option, you know?
I asked this question because I've seen that with a lot of people I've grown up around, and I've seen this culture that you have to pursue a certain field or a certain topic area because it's trendy, right? And I see like a large cohort of people who are interested in pursuing whether it be finance or computer science because that's what's making the money right now, and that's what they believe they must do in order to live a good life. But I think a large percentage of those people are also not very passionate about what they're pursuing. And a lot of people end up in corporate jobs or jobs where it lacks a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning through the work they're doing. And I think the thing with work is that it can be a really meaningful thing if you enjoy what you're working on, right? And I've read stories of the past of people that have been so immersed in the work they do, whether it be Leonardo da Vinci, who's painting, he loved that. And it was everything to him. People like Albert Einstein, who just loved the idea of solving problems and thinking about the universe and how everything functions. And for them, work was this meaningful, fulfilling thing because it brought them a sense of meaning to their life. But then there's a large percentage of people that see work as a negative thing, right? That work is something I need to do out of obligation, but I do it so that I can get done with it and do what I actually want to do and have fun. And maybe that might be partying, maybe that might be go hiking, whatever that might be for people. But there's this dichotomy because some people see it as the thing that makes life meaningful, and some people see it as the thing that they have to do out of obligation, but they don't enjoy doing it. So when I go back to the question I asked earlier, that do you think that the culture of the second group of people is growing? How do you think people do you think that is a real problem that there's some people that fall into the zone where they don't actually enjoy the work they're doing? And have you seen people like that?
I'm yeah, there are lots of people that don't enjoy what they're doing, but I think there's also a negative connotation with like pursuing a job to make money. Like making money is a bad thing and you can't enjoy your job. You can't work that hard and make that much money because then you're like soulless and like you're giving your soul. You need to find something that's like changing the world or more meaningful. But if there's meaning in that job, right? Like I think if you enjoy it, you've worked hard for it. Maybe you've gone through school, you've gone through business school, and people can enjoy those jobs as well. But it has this idea that it's like a grind. You get on the train, you go work in the city, and then you're there till 8, and then you come home, and you go to bed, and then blah, 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 you just do it over and over again. And my niece is doing that now, and she does hate her job. She cannot wait to leave her job. But on the other hand, I feel that some people are always looking for the next thing. Like, oh, if I can just get into this college, I'm gonna be happy. And then they get into college, like, oh, well, if I can just get into this like internship, then I'll be happy. Then they get there, they're like, well, oh, if I can just get into med school, then I'll be happy. Oh, well, if I just get placed like with this unit, like blah, 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 then I'll be happy. So it's almost like, is it always the next thing, or is it that particular thing that's not making you happy? And I think I don't know how people define that for themselves. And I think it varies as you age and go through the motions. Because then, if you grow up and then you have a family, and then are you like, I mean, it's in some ways you are, working to live, right? You need to kind of acquire those things to kind of maintain your family. And I think COVID was really interesting because it gave people more time. And the greatest thing about COVID for me, it was horrible in so many different ways. So many people lost loved ones, but I think it kind of like it just stopped everything. Like kids couldn't, like for my family, I had 4 kids, after school was constantly like you leave work and you're in your car like until 10 o'clock at night. You're like driving them around and it's just this crazy, hectic, frenetic lifestyle. And COVID kind of stopped all that. And so it just sort of slowed things down, and kids were just like, our neighborhood was like we talk about our neighborhood and how like COVID just like all the kids were outside all day long just playing. No one was allowed in the house, like no one, and it was like the sweet spot, like no one had phones, like so it's just like there was like old school. And I think that idea kind of made people realize like, wait a minute, what have I been doing all this time? Like we've all just been running around so much. And I think we're kind of in this like period where like that aspects of that were great, aspects of what I have are great, but like trying to like bridge that, like getting some of that normalcy back while still trying to work and kind of move forward and support our families and support ourselves, because it can be a grind. I was just reading, there was just an article in the paper today, I think in the Times, why are we so tired? Why are we so tired? And I think part of it is our work and commuting to work, the type of work we have, and then a combination of things that are going on in the world and like things that we don't have control over. And it just seems like Americans, like we're just really tired today. And I don't know what the answer is. I enjoy my job. So I don't really, I mean, there are aspects of my job. Everyone has aspects of the job that they don't enjoy, but we have a lot of autonomy here. We do have some flexibility, some free time, and my husband loves his job too. So we don't really deal with that grind in our family. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I like the idea of how humans are always striving for the next thing, right? They want to first achieve this goal, but then they want to achieve that goal, and they're never able to find that sense of satisfaction. And something I've realized over the last year in my life is that I heard this quote once that you've already achieved goals you said would make you happy, which I thought was an amazing quote because it kind of highlights that human nature. Like in the same way, dogs have this primal instinct to chew on bones. Humans have this primal instinct to chew on problems and solving them. But I guess the idea that helped me free myself from that notion of striving for the next thing was that it's not saying that striving for things is bad, because I think striving for things is good and makes life meaningful. But I guess it's realizing that sure, go and achieve the thing, but achieving the external success is not going to change your internal state, right? That there are ways you can find gratitude in your current life. And I think you mentioned that as well, that you can find meaning in the work you do, even if it's not some magical, idealistic thing that I'm changing the world through my work. Like it, sure, it could that could be great, but you can also find gratitude through your work in other ways, right? I think some people might be driven by an alternate kind of purpose, right? Like they're doing their work for their family or for their kids, and that kind of drives them and gives them meaning through their work. Or even they can kind of see that sure, their work they might be doing is not some big thing, but it's in some way impacting others' lives, and that can kind of give them meaning through their work. So I guess looking for ways you can find gratitude in your present life, finding things that you enjoy doing in between those hours as well, and not simply painting your 24-hour day with um, the monotonous grind, and finding ways throughout the day to incorporate things you love. I think that has helped me to free myself a lot from that notion of like, oh, I need the thing to be happy. I need the thing to be happy. And you can just be present now and find happiness here.
That's all great, right? And I think it's a lot as a young person to kind of have that mindset. I know I certainly was not thinking that way when I was in high school. Right? Like, it's very basic. But I do think there is, and I think it comes down to this baseline of happiness. Right? Like, oh, if I was just happy, if I get this, I'll just be happy. But I don't know how we define happy. Like, what is happiness? And individually it's defined, but as culturally, like, what is happiness? Like, what is success? And I think it fluctuates. I think people have sort of like a baseline of happy, like it's their baseline. And your baseline might be here, my baseline might be here. And we go above and below that baseline throughout our lives. But when, we're below it, we're like, oh, I'm not happy. I'm just not happy. But then you are, and then you go above and you come back. And so I think it's just realizing that, we do have a baseline, and there are going to be moments above it and below it, but you're going to come back to baseline. And what kind of keeps you at that baseline? Like what keeps you grounded at that baseline, and what is happy? And instead of always searching for like that top notch, right? Like that top level, like, oh, why aren't I here? Why aren't I here? Well, you have been there at moments in your life, but most of the time you're kind of just at baseline and that's okay. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say like throughout my life, like I know you probably wanted to hear about the Olympics, or like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like you've been to the Olympics, and I wouldn't say that it was like happy all the time. It was amazing. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Like I had no money. I did it for like 10, 11 years. All of my friends were like getting their jobs and going to grad school and getting PhDs and buying houses and getting married. And like, I'm like sitting on my butt going backwards, like working at Home Depot part-time. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was amazing, but I wouldn't say I was happy the whole time. Um, it was everything, right? It was happy, it was miserable, it was failure, it was reward. And I think your point of just starting being in the present is key. But that's really hard. Yeah, that's really hard.
I know you mentioned you didn't want to go into too much detail with the stories of your Olympic story. So I'm just a little bit curious about it, so we can try spending some time on it. But if at any point you just want to cut me off and go to something else, I'm happy to do that as well. But one of the questions I had is that how'd you end up there? Like what life story, or how did you end up getting there in the first place? Like what motivated you to want to pursue that?
All right. I know it should be like this Instagram, TikTok, like motivational, like when I was 8, I was watching the Olympics and I wanted to go to the Olympics, but it's not. I was over 6 feet tall in high school, right? So you're sort of like spotting a unicorn. Like every coach for any sport's like, hey, do you want to try out for my sport? And so I played basketball, I played softball. I just didn't love them. I fouled out almost every game in basketball. I would just like lose my mind and foul out because I wanted to be the point guard. Like I wanted to pass and shoot, and I was always post, right? And I would just get beat up under there. It was like really light, and I just didn't like it. And softball was okay. And then they didn't have girls rowing my freshman year in high school. And a couple of girls were trying to form a team. And I was like, I'm a freshman. I don't want to do that. Like, I'm just trying to figure out how to do high school. And so the coach came up to me and I went out for my sophomore year and I just fell in love with it. I absolutely loved it in high school. It was fun. I love being outside. I love being in nature, and you were outside on the water all the time. You were always with the boys team, and it was just fun. It was like it was just a new group of kids, and it wasn't just the girls, which can sometimes get a little like so it was all of us together, and I just fell in love with it. And so then I was the first person in my family to kind of even think about going to college. And so I was like, I'll go to college to row because I love rowing. And so like school was sort of secondary. And I went to Rutgers because it was in New Jersey and that's what we did. And I don't know if I necessarily I did enjoy rowing there. It was like my group, it gave me kind of purpose and sort of grounded me in terms of schedule and discipline in college. But I started to have a negative relationship with it in some ways because it was the first time I felt like all the pressure was on me to like change the program, or I was brought in to like do something with the program and I should be like this amazing leader and this amazing athlete. And I just didn't want to, I wasn't ready to play that role. I didn't want to play that role. I just kind of wanted to show up and work hard and then kind of be done and just be a normal teammate. But I think also just, again, being the tallest, it's sort of like, people would say, oh, it's so amazing. You're so tall. Like you get so lucky, but you are, right? You do have advantages, but it's also like if I sat down and sat down for an erg test, like kind of when I got to the elite level a little bit higher, like you're sort of expected to do something, right? And so when you do it, you're expected to do it. And so even though you did do it and you're like, wow, I did that, it almost was like, it was never like, wow, that's amazing. Good job. It was sort of like, oh, okay, well, you should be able to do that because you are this, like this body, this specimen, like blah, blah, blah. So it just kind of nothing felt rewarding. Nothing felt fun after a while. And then I was going to be done. Like I didn't really, I had no aspirations to make the national team or anything, but my coach, I guess, got in touch with the Olympic coach and said, hey, I have this athlete. I think, she could be good one day. And so they shipped me off to a camp. Oh, that was the other thing. After my high school year, I loved it in high school. And so I wanted to kind of pursue it. I went to junior national team camp in high school. Like 3 days in, the coach is like, yeah, you're not going to make the team, but you can learn as much as you can. So I was cut from junior national team camp like the first week. And then after college, I went to row over the summer because I didn't know what else I was going to do. Like my boyfriend and I, it's my husband now, we went to Philly and we were going to just like row and work and just kind of like, because he was a rower too. And then I was pulled to a development camp. And then from then on, I just kind of made the team. But I was a kind of a reluctant athlete. Like I was kind of constantly pulled into it until I kind of found it for myself a little bit.
Yeah, going back to your story with the expectations, I guess another definition of happiness I heard is just what you get minus what you expected, right? So if the expectation is low, you'll feel a lot more fulfilled when you get something that you didn't even think you're going to get. But when you already know that this is something I should get and you don't get it, that's when you kind of feel miserable. And another thing I heard is that something you're born with, you don't feel that great about, right? That, for example, if I'm a child and I'm born into a family with a lot of money and people say, oh, you should be so happy because you have the money that you were born into. Since you were born with it, it's kind of becomes the baseline. And I guess you only feel satisfied or fulfilled when you cross that baseline and achieve something of your own, or like you achieve something that you weren't born with, so it feels like it's something that your own you can hold on to. And when you transitioned into college and you sort of lost that love for the sport you initially felt, were you able to find it again? And what allowed you to find it again if you were able to do so?
I did find it again because I did it for another 7 years after college, but I think I think inside of me, I wanted it. Like I did want to make the national team. I did want to go to the Olympics deep inside, but I didn't want to tell anybody. And I didn't, because I was afraid of failing, I think, basically. So if I said it out loud, then I'd have to back it up. Right. But if I didn't say it, or I was like, I don't know, I could take it or leave it, or, I'll see how it goes. Then I could kind of figure it out. I gave myself some space to figure that out. So I think it was really just about fear of failing because I just wasn't sure. And I didn't want to say out loud, I really want this. I really want this. And I don't know why. And even if I said that and failed, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world. But in my head at that time, I couldn't, like, I just couldn't get myself there because maybe I really wanted it. And so then after college, I made the team that summer. We went to the Czech Republic. It was all a lot of fun. And then I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee to train. And it was just a different stimulus, a new environment. I gained some confidence. I felt like I was part of the group a little bit more rather than I wasn't the best one. I think that was helpful, right? Not being the best one, not having that pressure. So you can kind of like feel like you were the underdog and you're like climbing your way up. And my coach was tough. He was tough. He made me feel normal and he made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And I think that worked for me. Being told I can't a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, all right, well, maybe I can, rather than be like, yes, you can do this. You're like, you should be this, you should be that. He never did that. So I think it was just that environment. And then we just had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs. It was hard. It was, I mean, it's not like, we're landing at North, like, it's not like you're in war hard. Like, it's like ridiculous. That's why I don't like talking about it in some ways. Cause it's like, oh, it was the hardest thing. And it was so challenging. And it was, it was awesome. Right? Like you're with a bunch of people that are goal oriented, the same goal that you have, that not necessarily are always supportive of each other because you're like trying to beat each other up the whole time because you're trying to make the team. But you're traveling, you're working. It's every day there's a little bit of success and a little bit of failure. You're kind of moving yourself closer to the goalpost, and you have your own goals, but then you have the team goal. And the cool thing about rowing versus other sport, I love rowing, but it's like everyone's the same. Like you can be on a soccer team and not be that great, and you can have a couple great players, and maybe your team wins, but how much did you play a role in it? But if you're on a rowing boat and you're in an 8, like everyone's doing the same exact thing, right? So you're only as good as your teammates. So you have a responsibility to kind of be a good teammate and kind of bring everyone along. And so there's a different dynamic, I think, or unique dynamic that kind of goes along with that. So yeah, I fell back in love with it. We traveled all over the world. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun with a lot of disappointment.
What are some of the best memories or stories you think back to when you think about your time rowing?
Rowing. I mean, definitely the opening ceremonies in '96 was pretty cool, right? Like you're all dressed up and it's the first time and it was in the United States, it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And it just feels special. It does, it's just emotional. Like you feel like you are representing your country and just seeing all of the other countries walk in it and you've made it there, you've earned it, and you're just so excited about what's going to happen, but you're also so nervous. So definitely the opening ceremonies in '96 was special. I would say rowing, I miss being on the water. I miss just hearing the oarlocks like move, the oars moving the oarlocks. I miss like being out on the water after a long workout and like the sun setting over the river in Chattanooga, and just like visual and aesthetic memories like that I miss that. I miss laughing with my teammates and working out with them. I miss being fit. I could eat anything I wanted when I was working out. Yeah, you just miss the camaraderie. You miss, and every day was task oriented. Like you showed up and you had a goal and you either achieved it or you didn't, but you could try the next day. And there was just something about that was great. There's a sense of gratification every single day. It was challenging, it's somewhat attainable, but maybe not. So you're kind of like always pushing that edge. And it was awesome. Yeah, it was great. I would say probably the most disappointing was also '96 because we had won the World Championships in '95 and we're on our home course and we were expected to win. And you can imagine how that story played out, right? We didn't win. We didn't medal, right? So that was probably the most disappointing.
So I'm not gonna lie, I think my knowledge of how crew works and the races, I don't have much knowledge in that area. So how does it work? So how long are the races? Typically, I know at probably different levels of different lengths of the races. So at the Olympic level, how long are the races? How does the scoring and everything work? Is it just placement, or what goes into a crew or rowing meet?
Yeah, you and much of the population, including my parents, like they'd be like, wait, what boat are you in? Like what they take pictures of the races and I'm like, Ma, that's not even my boat. It's like so confusing, right? You have an 8, you have a 4, you have a double, you have a quad, you have a single. Only the 8s have coxswains, which is like the shorter people that kind of sit and kind of like they steer, they do a lot in terms of kind of getting you through a workout and through a race. So at the Olympics and even in college and most high school races, it's 2,000 meters. So it's a little over a mile. So athletes that train for a mile, it's similar. Like you have to do long distance, but with rowing, you also have to have power because it's a combination of aerobic endurance and power. And so I rowed the 8 and 96, and then I moved to sculling, which is where you have 2 oars. You have 1 oar in each hand. Sweep is 2 oars on, 2 hands on 1 oar. And so I moved to sculling. So I did a little bit of both. I was in the quad in 2000, and then I was training for the 8 again in 2004 in Greece. But then I had my 4th child, so that kind of knocked me out of the running with that one.
So early on, you mentioned that one of the things you loved most about rowing was being out in nature. And you also mentioned that one of the biggest problems in the world today is a lack of nature. How do you think we got here?
Oh, I think I don't even know. I mean, it's a combination of things. It's any sort of media. It's just the fear that, your kids are going to go outside, they're going to get kidnapped or hurt. And I think today, just being unpleasant, sticky, it's hot, or you're really cold. And I think we have a lot more to do inside. I think generationally, I think kids are maybe they don't mind hanging out with their parents as much, or parents are more involved in bringing up their kids in terms of, it's not like parents back then were just completely neglectful, but it's just different in terms of how much time we spend with our kids, because I think of sports in that sense. You're involved with them, or art or other things that you're involved with them outside of school that you drive them to and you're engaged with, you show up to their games. It just wasn't like that. Like you just wanted to get out of the house and go hang out with your friends or do stuff outside. And I think today it's unfortunately, it sounds so cliche, but I do think it's the phone, and you're just comfortable at home and it's easy, you're entertained, you don't have to go outside and figure out what to do and make your own fun. And yeah, I don't know.
When you mentioned the nature of children spending more time with their parents and the fear of being kidnapped or the weather's bad or you'll get sick, I kind of started thinking, where did this stem from? Because I feel like it is true. It's not that parents neglected their children in the past, but there was a certain type of relationship between children and parents in the past that I feel, at least from what I've heard, because I wasn't a child back then. So, um, but yeah, I do want to ask, what do you think? How do you think that happened? But I think that an idea that just popped in my mind might even be the media, because why are parents so scared of their kids getting kidnapped, or their parents so scared of kids getting sick in the cold outside? It's probably because the media is making them too scared, right? I mean, clickbait culture, there's so much dopamine and fear packed into the things you read online that can insert these fears that, oh my God, I don't want my child to get this disease I just heard about. And read some of these news articles and it's kind of insane how they're saying, oh my, didn't we pull one up in class where it's picking your nose causes Alzheimer's or something? Was that in this class? It might have been a different class. I think that was with, yeah.
I don't even remember.
I think it was in,
I can't remember.
I think, actually, it might have been in Dr. Venanzi's DEI day workshop, but it was like picking your nose causes Alzheimer's or something like that. But yeah, I think the media is scaring people too much. But do you think that's the main driver, or how have you seen that play out?
I mean, it's definitely a driver. I think, hey, everything's great, the world's great. It's not really going to sell newspapers or have you chime in to the 6 o'clock news, but fear and shock and awe like does sell. And I think that I haven't done the research. I don't know the rates for or kidnapping or anything like that associated with kids. But I imagine that we just see it more, we hear about it more, like, because we have 24/7 news, well, not news, but cable channels that kind of like filter things in from all around. And so you hear about it. I mean, you probably didn't hear about it back then, so you just didn't like know of it as much. Um, I I would say one of the worst days of my life was my son Henry, I thought I lost him. I thought he was kidnapped, and not just like, oh, I lost him at the beach or on the boardwalk for a little bit, which I did that too. But um, I we thought he was gone. I was home. I was supposed to go to the gym, and he wasn't in kindergarten yet, and Anna was baby, and I said, Henry, go put your shoes on. We're going to the gym. And I told him later that day we were going to go to his friend. I can't remember his kid's name. We were going to go to his house for lunch. It was just right around the corner. And we had painters in the house. Like the house was a mess. Like Anna was like, things were like kind of, it was just really busy. And I go to get ready and I couldn't find him. And I couldn't find him. And I'm calling him and I couldn't find him. And he was like, where would he go? Like he's 4 years old and I couldn't find him. So I didn't know what to do. I called my husband. He was at work, and I called the police. Like we had the police come. There were helicopters. The dog sniffing police came, and they asked for a blanket from it. Like it was 2 hours, and it was the worst feeling in the world. I felt like I was retreating into this tunnel, and I was never going to come out. Like I could kind of hear people talking, but I was gone. And I just kept yelling, so sorry, I'm so sorry, because Anna was there, and I was like, I just knew their life would be so different. Um, how, however, I didn't become like this anxious parent that wouldn't let my kids go out again. It didn't really change that for me. And I don't know why. I think I should have maybe. um, but I think it's because it's something you can't control. I couldn't. And so that like you think you can, but you don't have control over that. And it's hard. Being a parent is the most vulnerable thing anyone can do. And you just can't control some things. And so I think it's about letting that go a little bit. And it's scary. It's not pleasant, but and I think people are trying to control. So because I think so much of our life is out of control, like global climate change. Like there's so many things you can look at that seems to be out of our control, and it's upsetting. But there's some things that we can control. I can control how you get back and forth to school. I can drive you there. I can see you walking in the building. I can drop you off. I can control that. If I let you walk to school, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if you're going to get there. I don't know like who you're going to, who you're going to meet, blah, blah, blah. But so I think it's a lot of it's about control, because I think there is this fear from, and where that fear comes from, I'm not sure. And that's not necessarily being out in nature. I think we spend less time in nature, but we have more stores that sell us stuff to be outside in nature. Like I grew up, there weren't like these big REI stores or Dick's, or what's the other one besides our EMS. All these stores like sell you stuff to be out in nature, but I think most of us spend less time in nature like than we ever have before. Or just being outside, kicking around.
We'll get back to the nature, but where did you guys end up finding Henry?
Uh, so I was in the back of I think I was sitting. I think my parents came up, and I don't know if I can't even remember. I don't know if I was sitting in the back of someone's car, and I just heard screaming, we found him, we found him. And I just kind of collapsed, and um, I eventually walked over. I was Ami Shah, it was my friend, it was Rohan. They were at Rohan's house. And we all run down there, and the poor kid, he was dressed up as Darth Vader. He went to her house because I told him we were going to go there after that. So he went there, they were playing, and she didn't call, like she just thought, oh, Henry's here early. And we run around the corner, and he was dressed up as Darth Vader. They were like playing Star Wars dressed up. And yeah, it was rough. It was a bad day.
So going back to nature, so when you say lack of nature, I guess the main thing you're saying is that we spend less time out in the nature, right? So whether that be a lot of time indoors, a lot of time on our screens, and I was talking about this with Mr. Dom as well, a week ago, and one of the things we thought about was that the way your dopamine circuit has been evolved in your body is trained in a way to reward you for doing hard things, right? If you go out and hunt the deer, then you feel positive emotion and you feel dopamine going through your body because you did something that promotes your survival. But one of the challenges that we saw in the modern world was that you're rewarded for sitting on your couch, right? Because since screens and video games and TV give you the dopamine that you would ultimately get from doing a hard workout or going out and being in nature. Since you're able to access it at such a heightened stimulated level sitting on your couch, you're rewarded for that behavior. And that in turn causes you to not want to go out and be in nature because there's so much access to dopamine just in your own room. So I know you're the bio teacher, so any thoughts on that? Do you think that has some truth in it or?
Truth of it in terms of the dopamine. Yeah, I mean, it's dopamine is a drug, right? Like all pharmaceutical companies are trying to mimic what we already have inside of our brain. There's a lot of good stuff up there. But yeah, it is a drug and it's part of our reward system and it's what makes us feel good. And when it does feel good, we try and reenact that behavior, do that behavior over and over again, whether it's taking a drug or it's falling in love or it's, yeah, sitting on your phone and seeing how many like likes you get on something. And I don't know how we get away from that because it does feel good. It's easy. It's instant gratification or it's not. So it has its benefits and it has its negative too in terms of negatively impacting your dopamine hits. Like if you don't get a like or snap map, is that what it is? Snap, like you can see we're like, why are all these people together and I'm not there? Like that like it has a negative effect on your emotions. So I think, I don't know. I don't think just being out in nature, it is good for us, but I don't know if people necessarily. So if you do things and you have this level of dopamine hit and you try and do something else, it doesn't have that same level. So it doesn't feel as rewarding. So you're not going to seek out this behavior. So I think we've altered the levels of dopamine that we kind of deal with every day. And so other things just don't seem as exciting, which is unfortunate. But like, I mean, we talk about you teen, like screenagers, but we all would have been the same probably when we were teenagers. But it is interesting. You're the first human beings on this planet that are kind of growing up in this digital age from a very, very young age. Like you've kind of grown up with screens your whole life. So we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think that when you mentioned how we deal with so much more dopamine now on a day-to-day level than we did before, so other things don't make us feel as fulfilled. I do agree with that. And I know we were earlier talking about like some of the changes I made in my life last winter. And some of them included lowering my screen time significantly, right? So one of the biggest achievements I made is that I think for quite a bit of time I had like a 20 or 30 minute screen time on my phone. I basically drastically reduced the number of times I pick it up per day. Um, I know I mentioned I watch podcasts, but I also drastically decreased the amount of time I'm spending on my computer, spending I deleted all this other social media and everything. I didn't watch like movies or anything like that. And one of the biggest changes I found is that everyday things were more fulfilling, right? Whether it be walking to class or it be talking to someone. I noticed that obviously not immediately, but after some time I noticed that those when I went to bed at night, I felt like those activities felt so much more fulfilling and satisfying to me. And when you think about it now, like looking back, it makes so much sense, right? Because if you're so used to feeling at a level 1,000 of dopamine, even for short bits throughout the day, then the level 100 won't feel that good, right? But if you eliminate all the highs, then your baseline increases, right? And you're able to experience more joy through everyday activities. But yeah, I know a lot of people say that our generation is like very weak, right? We're growing up with so much access to instant gratification and comfortable lifestyles, but I do feel like that's kind of destroying us, and I do think that it might be one of the worst times to grow up because it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole of just stimulating yourself and not able to live life in a more fulfilling and satisfying way. So it is a problem, but I guess if we think about solutions, obviously I don't think it's easy for anyone to just say, okay, I'm gonna never pick up my phone again. Not possible even because I still use my phone. I think it's definitely important for us to be able to use those, but as long as they're not using us. But yeah, I think what at least some solutions I can think about in my head, and then we can switch to some of the ideas you might have, is that I think just having knowledge about how it's impacting has helped me a lot. Just understanding like what it's doing to me and how it's affecting the biochemistry in my brain and impacting the way I live, and then feeling the differences in different lifestyles. That has inspired me to just want to spend more time outside, right? That I love to go hiking. Over the break, I'll be going hiking with my parents and trying to do day trips with my friends. 'Cause I just love being outside. I love being in the outdoors. Even if that's just playing spike ball on summer campus, just trying to spend more time outside away from my room. Um, Having the knowledge of it definitely helped. And then looking at it in a positive way, because I do think that there's not a lot of people who look at being outdoors as a negative thing, right? Obviously, there's the fear growing up, like, oh, it's the weather's bad and things like that. But other than that, I feel like it is a kind of a positive thing. It's just there's other things that are better, right? But if you start to prioritize it as something you want to spend more time doing, right? Like going on a walk by the lake or going on a run or going on a hike, and then try to make it like a commitment that once a week or every time I get a break, try and do something and it's good for you and feel those positive benefits. I think those two steps are definitely the first ones people could take to kind of transition onto the lifestyle. But what do you think? What are the solutions do you have in mind?
I think spending time outside will never um not make you feel good. All right. You think you just it's just I think it's part of our DNA. Um it changes your outlook. Especially if you're exercising, I just don't think it'll never not make you feel good. Having said that, not everyone um has the physical ability to do things outside. And so I do think the internet and the phones and all that has given people access to the world that kind of makes them feel connected in a lot of ways. So I think we're talking about like, we're not necessarily talking about everybody, like not everyone can access the outside in similar ways, but you just can't act like just in terms of disabilities, you can't access certain areas and get through parks and walk through the woods and get through the woods. But I do think being outside, and they've done studies like if they hospital patients, like if you have a window that allows you to see trees or greenery, they seem to recover faster. And in senior homes, if they have access to outside, or if their room has a view with greenery or trees, it also seems to give them a better sense of like health and just sort of well-being. So there is something to it. Then I was reading there are rising cases of myopia in kids, where like your eyeballs turn, I'm getting a little technical now, but where your eyeballs get more of a football shape than a round shape. And it's from looking at screens or reading too much at a young age. So like we're physically changing our eyeballs. That's crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even thought about this. So I like went to I took my son and like, no, he seems fine. But yeah, it's that quick. I mean, all my kids wear glasses. I never wore glasses. And so, right, like it's just this because it's so close and it's literally changing the shape of our eyeballs, which can run into problems later down the road. It can eventually lead to blindness, like, but if you don't take care of it. But so I mean, and there's a book called Last Child in the Woods, like a whole book written about this. I think it's over 10 years old. The nature deficit disorder, like it has a name for it, like nature deficit disorder. We have a name for it. We're changing our eyeballs. So I do think there's value in it. Being a parent and trying to get your kids to go outside, it's not easy. Like it's something that you have to force them to do. Depending on the age, like I think like 8, 9 and under, it's easier. But once they get a phone, once they get a screen, it just changes. And so you're constantly like, get outside, go outside. Well, my friends aren't outside. They're like, we're all playing a game online. It's like, well, ask them if they want to go outside, get outside. And it's just a pain. You're constantly trying to get them outside. And if they are outside, it's because maybe you've driven them to practice and then they're outside and then they come home and then they go on their screen. So we've tried going camping. We try and do stuff outside. And I hope they appreciate it down the road. And I think it's something that, you have to do as a family or want to do as a family or aspects of it. And it doesn't have to be like a great hiking trip or it's even just walking around or working outside or gardening or doing something around the house. But I think there is absolute value in spending time outside. And I appreciate it. I need it. I think maybe, I don't know if it's rowing for so many years, just being outside all the time. It's something that I hold dear and I think is very important. And I wish maybe you should teach a class where you spend more time outside. I remember my favorite class in college was dendrology in grad school, where you just study trees. I loved that class because I finally learned like that's a ginkgo biloba tree. And like you kind of get a sense of place and time of the natural world that I never had before. So it kind of like opened up all of this information.
Well, my friend mentioned that he's in an English class this year called Secrets of Nature, where they just
Yeah.
go outside. I don't know exactly what they do, but I see them just walking by the library outside every now and then. He seems to enjoy that class because they get to spend time outside. What that friend was telling me at Brock, he's also saying that he learned about how nature sounds. It just the sounds of nature help your mental health a lot, and that he tries to go outside and spend time just to listen to the sounds and the birds and stuff. And he feels that that improves his mental health as well. And do you think there's science to back that up? Is that true as well?
Science back up the sounds of nature. I'm sure it all kind of ties together, like the visual and auditory aspects of it, because it just slows things down and it forces you to kind of observe things that maybe you haven't before. However, I do wear my headphones a lot when I'm outside, so I don't know about that. But yeah, I think Lee Wood teaches that class. And I think I've had some students ask me, like, Mrs. Tara, can you help me find this tree? And this is just tree. Is this what kind of tree? Is there a red maple tree around? So I love that idea that she's teaching that class. And I think also, I think every generation talks about the younger generation, like, oh, the younger generation, blah, 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 like they're not good, they're doing this. And so our generation is talking about the younger generation, they don't spend enough time outside, and we were always outside. And there are all these memes like on Instagram, like growing up in the 80s, about being in playgrounds with like asphalt instead of like 12 feet of mulch, and how we got third-degree burns on our slides, and like how we spent more time outside, and like we romanticize it a little bit too. But so I think there are good and bad things about every generation, but I think it's also typical for the older generation to say, the younger generation is it's just not the same. They don't have the same values. They're not doing the same things. So I think there's a little bit of that, but I think there's some truth in it as well.
Another problem you mentioned was that we talk too much these days and that there's too much noise. And I know we were talking earlier about the media, so maybe it's correlated with that, but talk to me about what you meant by there's a problem with noise and talking too much these days.
I just think that it's just everywhere. There's so much advice everywhere. Whether it's speeches or special days with themes or TikTok, and like I never had Instagram until this year, and I have it because I'm trying to follow my son's hockey team, but I have to delete it like every other few weeks because I'll find myself like 30 minutes later, like just like like I'm laughing like some like, wait, what am I doing? But it's just it's video after video of people saying a lot of it's related to sports. And just like giving their life lessons for sports or things that they've learned or things that kids should be doing. Like, if you want to be a good player, you have to do this, blah, 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 blah. And it's all talk, right? Like, I just feel like I think you just have to kind of go through it and live through it and figure it out yourself. So another popular thing is like, what would you go back and tell your like 16-year-old self, if you could, what would you say to them? And it's adorable, like, and like some people say, like, everything that they say is nice and true, but I, I don't think you can go back and say anything really, because what am I going to say? Like, savor the good moments. It goes by so fast. Like, be the best person you can be, and all that's true. But I think you just have to kind of live your life and you figure these things out on your own. And I just think there's just so much chatter and so much talk, and I think it puts pressure on people young people and anyone to kind of or just makes them feel less because like, well, I'm not doing that, or I don't feel that way all the time, or I'm not the first to practice every day, or I'm not the last person to leave practice every day, or gosh, they seem so strong and so strong-willed and so motivational, and why aren't I like that? Because they're not like that all the time either. Like, no one's like that 100% of the time.
Yeah, I guess the way to best way to get life lessons is to go live life, right? Go experience it yourself because, reading books is useful. You can learn lessons from other people. Watching podcasts is useful. You can learn lessons from other people. But I guess there's a point where if you're spending so much time doing that all day, is that really productive anymore? Like, I don't feel as so because there's some periods in my life where I think I've found a good balance between it now where it's like I'm not spending 8 hours a day consuming content about how to improve my life. Even if it's like an hour a week, I feel like that's still useful because it could help you to navigate how to live a good life. But there is definitely, I think the amount of content we consume, the amount of input and advice we're taking in, it's reached a point where we're not even really using that in any way because you can't learn it, I guess, until you go out and do it yourself. And um, there was another idea I had from what something you mentioned
You
before.
can be, I mean, you can be inspired, right, to do something. I think there's something inspirational about it. And I think like listening to people's stories and how they got to where they are is interesting, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that um, you're going to be moved to action, right? So your action is kind of like, because everything you are is based on your experiences. So you need to have those experiences, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's a negative to listen to other people's experiences and their stories and how they got there, as long as it's part of a whole context of who that person is, rather than like these snippets of like people on like TikTok or like Instagram saying like, you need these 4 things in life are the most amazing. These are what you need to focus on. But that's why I asked you earlier. I'm like, did you podcast your parents or your grandparents yet? Because like they have stories too of how they got there. And I know when you're young, you don't see your parents as maybe people all the time, but you know, they were teenagers once too, and they have their stories. So I think you are who you are based on your experiences. And so you just need to get those experiences.
Yeah, the other piece I want to talk about is the when you mentioned that people feel lesser about themselves when they see the other people online, because they feel as if they're not meeting the threshold or the expectation that's placed on them through what they're consuming. And I guess another thing that's driving that is that a lot of the things they see are not even real, right? It's this idealized perfect world version of some person of the number one lesson he's learned in 10 years. And I think that places an expectation on us that also leads to the what we're talking about before with satisfaction and feeling fulfilled in life, right? I think if you spend an hour or two a day consuming content from the best of the world to ever do it, you'll always feel like you'll never be great at anything, right? An analogy I like to think back to is that before or early on in our time as humans, whether when we were in hunter-gatherer civilizations or even later on, like in agricultural societies as well, the only people you really compared yourself to were the people in your tribe, right? The 100 people in your tribe, which is why mastering some skill or feeling you're competent at something was so much easier, right? Because you're only comparing yourself to 100 people. But today, if you play the guitar and you're one in a million, there's 20 of you in New York. So and you could see them online all the time, the best to ever do it. And I think that leads to a level of unsatisfactoriness in your own development as well. And it only asks that not only do you have access to a tribe of 7 million people or 7 billion people now instead of 100 people, a lot of the people you see online, you don't see the full story as well. You see the snippets of the best part of their life. So I did agree with that second point, like heavily. I think that contributes to the a level of unsatisfaction and lack of fulfillment in today.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be someone that's better than you and faster than you and smarter than you and better looking than you, and there's always going to be that. I think, I think the definition of sort of like, so you're talking about playing guitar and that, like, what is your goal in that? Like, is your goal to be the best, to like be in the top 40 or have a hit? Or is your goal to kind of play with like your smaller group and just have some gigs and enjoy it? So I think it depends on what your goal is. And if your journey is kind of mismatched with your goal, then I think that's where frustration and disappointment and sort of sadness comes in. But I think you have to maybe I think we have to think about our goals. And sometimes I don't know how musicians end up becoming like top, because there's so many good musicians. Like even here at Peddie, some of the musicals, like they're so good. Like they're so good. And I don't have the ability to kind of know like why aren't they on Broadway? Like they just seem so good to me. So it seems like there's so many today as well. Like you said, there's so many that are so good at so many things. And I don't know how some reach it to the top and some don't. Um, and I think it is that comparison. What's the saying? Like comparison is the thief of joy. And it kind of is, but it's so hard not to do it.
Yeah, I guess there are so many factors that contribute. Like it goes back to what you were saying before that the things you have control over, you don't have control over the outcome, right? Whether you become the top at some category and also do you even want to be the top is another question you have because maybe that's something you feel as if would be nice, but maybe it's not your authentic desire. Maybe that's some external thing that you think will make you happy again, which is the other topic we're talking about. But Yeah, again, you don't have much control over the outcome, right? You don't, there are so many nuanced factors that lead to who becomes successful and who doesn't. But I guess the only thing you do have control over is your input, right? And sometimes I like to make little equations in my head that if I gave 10,000 hours to this activity, I'd probably be at least a little good at it, right? Like, um, if I spent at least 20 years rowing, I'd probably be okay. Or if I made 1,000 podcasts, I'd probably have at least some people listening to it, right? So I guess those kind of equations that make it simpler because then you don't have to question about, what does that artist have that I don't have, or what do I have to do? What did she do that work? Because the stories they say about what led to their success are probably not the things that actually led to their success. And that's not even their fault, right? A lot of it's like post hoc rationalizations or making a story out of something in the background that they already did that we don't even know, or we haven't even seen. But one thing you know for sure that you can control is, I guess, the input. And I think that's helped me a lot as well in goal setting and striving for things that I want to achieve as well.
I think that's a great point, and I think for you to come to that now is pretty good. It took me a while to get there. I think I had mentioned to you, I think one of my greatest goals was not actually making the team, it was not quitting the team, because I did quit in 94. I I always like had like, oh, well, he wants me to do this, or my coach wants me to do that, and I can't do this because I'm not there. This person's blah blah blah. Like I kind of always, again, I was fear of failing, so I always kind of gave myself a little out, a little excuse. And in 94, I didn't make the top boat. I didn't make the top four, and I was just kind of really, I was annoyed. I was upset, and so I quit. It lasted about 3 weeks, but I quit. And so I kind of had to do a little soul search and be like, okay, it was 94. There was 2 years away from the Olympics. Like, I just need to kind of stop whining and stop making excuses when he asked me to do something and just try to do it as well as I can. And then until I kind of made that switch in my own head, I was always going to just kind of be struggling along. Like, I mean, I was making the team, but I just wasn't, I wanted to be kind of at the top. And so I think it was that transformation to kind of decide for myself that this was what I needed to kind of take control over that. And I had to stop comparing. Like I had to kind of stop saying, well, this person's not doing that and this person's not that. I just like, what am I going to do? What can I control? And I mean, I think I was maybe 22 by the time I got there. And I was kind of, it was a situation that got me there, but it's not easy, right? Because it's because then it's on you a little bit, but then it's on you, right? Then you have control and it's just all positive. Like everything just kind of, it just made everything so much easier, right? Because I lost all of that chatter. I lost all of that, like dragging me down and kind of making me focus on things that didn't matter that I couldn't control. And I just had to focus on what I could control. And it's not like every day from that forward, I was like this amazing, like will-powered individual that showed up every day for practice. Like you still kind of go through it and it's constantly always like you're dealing with it. But you're right. Like stop comparing yourself and kind of just seeing what you can do, and you will be able to do stuff. Right. I could put 10,000 hours in. I'm never going to be a gymnast, right? Because it's like just part of the equation that you talk about an equation. But and that other 10,000 hours things. What is that? What's that guy's name? Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah. 10,000 hours. And then there's other things like 22 minutes a day for a year, and you could be like really good at something, or I forget, that's another, it's all these like 7-minute abs, 22 minutes a day, 28-day calisthenic routine, change your life. Yeah. Yeah. It's always, yeah, some equation.
When I asked you about some of the best moments of your life, you mentioned that there are different types of happiness. What do you mean by that?
I just think it's a hard question to ask. Like, what's the best moment of your life? I just think there's, um, you have small moments of happiness. Like you wake up, like one of my happiest moments is sitting in the morning. We go camping and I love making coffee and just sitting. We go island camping in Lake George and just sitting there and just being there, smell the coffee, like look at the mist rising up from my coffee. Like that's a happy moment for me. But then you also have like silly happy moments or um, like relationship happy moments or like little moments with your kids or like athletic achievement happy moments. So I think there's different types of happy. There's ecstatic happy, then there's just like content happy. And so I think there's lots of happy moments And so, but again, they're moments, right? It's not like you're always there. You're just kind of like, oh, this was like, and so, and I think it's just sort of getting to that idea that you're not always going to be happy. And what is happy anyway? That's what I mean, like by there's different moments. Like if you're just like just relaxed and content and feeling good, like that's a happy moment. That's feeling good. That's happy. Rather than I think when people think happy, like you're like, oh, how you doing? Like that's a different type of, yeah, and that person may not be happy either, like the one that's always like seemingly happy. So I don't know, did that answer? Yeah.
Terhaar, thank you so much for coming down, taking the time to have a conversation with me today. Anything else you want to close with?
No, that's great. I think this is really neat what you're doing, and I think you're kind of a cool young man.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you after the break. If you enjoyed that episode with Jennifer Terhaar, then you're going to love this episode right here with Ryan Bennett, who ran an ultra marathon and shared amazing stories. Make sure you hit that link now to watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.